One of my first ones was the charges were gang rape. So it was an allegation of two young men who had gone drinking with a young woman. The young lady went with her friend to a bar to celebrate a particular cultural event and met up with a bunch of other individuals. Her friend had become intoxicated and said that, and she had become intoxicated. She was very drunk. So her friend, who was male, said he couldn't take her home, but his two friends could take her home. So they put her in a cab, her and the two new fellows that she had been drinking with, went to her apartment, and instead of dropping her off, as everyone had anticipated, they went in, and because she was so intoxicated, she came to with one gentleman pulling up his pants and saying that was good, and the other gentleman actually on top of her, raping her. And she had turned away, she said something, he got off her, and they left. Unfortunately, her experience didn't fit into our legal system. Her approach was to call her friend who had told her to go with the two gentlemen, and she told him about it. Then the friend said, well, we have to talk about this. So he contacted the two young men who had raped her, and the two young men contacted her to discuss the incident. They both apologized and said, what can we do to repair this this damage? And so they talked about money. And when she told her music teacher what had occurred and what she was trying to negotiate, and she didn't know what she was supposed to do, her music teacher said she's supposed to go to the police. So she did. And the two gentlemen were charged. The preliminary hearing took over 25 appearances. And I had to meet this young woman every time. And I would know that sometimes when we went on recess, or when she asked to go on a recess, what she was actually doing is going to the bathroom to vomit. And I couldn't let that affect my voice or my demeanor. I couldn't counsel her because that's not my job. I was and felt for her, but I wasn't in a position to express that in any way. I wasn't in a position to express that to her in court or to my family, because that's confidential. And so that stays with me. It was unclear whether that woman was in any shape, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, to testify again in Superior Court. And so that prosecution did not continue to its end. But it took the better part of a year, and I'll always remember her. And her trying to explain that meeting these gentlemen did not mean it did not happen. I'll always wonder where she is and how she's doing.
No, actually, the reason I became a Crown is because a friend of mine who was also duty counsel, and there were a bunch of people who were moving to the Crown's office, and someone said, you can use your power to do good. And that really appealed to me, this sort of innate sense I had to do justice.
This seemed to me and called to me as a very fulfilling project that is more than just a job or a career.
It's primarily because of the victims, and mostly because of women, and mostly because of my own sort of developing awareness of the many multifaceted problem of domestic violence.
That gives me a place of such privilege and control. The Crown is the voice of the documenting and the articulation of what's on the record. And I'm doing that with other women's lives. I'm doing that with other women's lives. I think the public would be very interested in what we do, how we do it, what we think, what we feel, the impact it has on some of us. It is the Crown who speaks to the victim and has to somehow capture that experience and fit it into the legal box. It is a Crown who has to ameliorate the experience of a victim who has to testify about the most personal and intimate details of a trauma they've experienced. It's a Crown who has to explain to that victim why it's worth doing that on the record and in public. It's a Crown, particularly a female Crown, who has to do so in an unbiased fashion, because to have your voice crack or to become emotionally involved in anything to do with the case means that it undercuts our credibility. And so when a female Crown speaks and prosecutes, articulates, submits, argues, it means that it is a female Crown that's taking her own experience as a woman, placing that as part of the perspective in a box that was not designed for that perspective. All prosecutors face that challenge. Women prosecutors face the challenge of doing it and being part of the system that experiences violence against women.
The media tends not to portray Crown attorneys, and there's lots of good reasons for that. Partly because we need to be part of a cohesive whole, and the ministry speaks for us. But what gets lost in that is the fact that we're actually an important part of the equation. Like, it's not just the defense fighting for someone who may be innocent. It's also, like, we have a job too. And I feel really strongly that I'm putting forward the case for the victim. There isn't anybody who is a Crown who wants to see someone innocent convicted. It's not about winning, but it is about justice. And from my perspective, the victims, people who've had terrible things done to them, they too deserve justice. And what we do is just as important as what the defense does in showing the community what our justice system is. Because otherwise they'll lose confidence in it. In order for the truth to come out, because that's what we want the best version of the truth, the one that's most understandable, the one that people will get, the one that will actually reveal what actually happened. In order to do that, you have to build a relationship with your witness.
It's about being accountable and not so much about punishment and guilt. Like, a lot of times, especially with sex assaults, which is what we're talking about, it's not about sending them to jail. The law is perverted in this way that it says, well, if you're inconsistent or if you're wrong, then you're not to be believed. When the truth is, you're often wrong about things even when you're telling the truth. And I had a case where a guy was stabbed and he said, oh, I saw the knife and I'm going to draw the knife for you. So he drew a picture of the knife in the police officer's book, and it's like this handle with this really, I remember the drawing hand that's like really serrated edge. And it wasn't the knife. Like, that wasn't the knife at all. But that's what he remembered. That's what his memory did. Because it's objective, So objectively, it was that knife that did the stabbing, and that's what you thought it looked like. You don't have to reconcile those because he's just wrong about that. But when it's a sex assault, you can't be wrong about anything. But in reality, we are wrong about things. We're mistaken about what we saw or what we heard or what we believed.
You know, sometimes they find out that when the person is convicted, it sure doesn't help everything. It's a sad day for everybody, actually.
I feel like if people knew what we really did, they would feel differently about us. If they knew how hard it was to lose, because they're also failures of the justice system to protect, failure of the justice system to do the right thing, and it's very devastating. But I think that talking about it and recognizing that it has this enormous impact on our day-to-day and on our psyche, then that's good. Like, that's important that we're having that conversation. And it may just be women who are having that conversation. I don't know. Yeah, it's definitely more difficult to be a woman lawyer. I look young, and so I get treated like I'm very young. And it's quite, it drives me crazy. It's like my thing where I want to say, I'm almost 50, I'm almost 50. Give me some respect. But, young male lawyers will talk down to me. Judges, they forget. They're like, oh, I know I've seen you around here a lot, but, or one judge was like, I know I just met you, or, oh, Miss Sweeney, and how long have you been practicing? I'm like, 18 years. Oh, we haven't met you. I haven't met you yet. Yeah, because you just became a judge.
Yeah, I know we don't like to think that we've come a long way with women in the profession. Doesn't quite feel that way. And I'm not even sure it's better than it was when I started 28 years ago. My experience has been that if you are a hardworking, dedicated, committed prosecutor, if you're a man, you get called tough. If you're a woman, you get called a bitch. I've had to go into a courtroom with a young colleague who has been reduced to tears. This has happened more than once, by the way. And I have to go in, it's like the 64-year-old judge is a giant toddler. I have to go in there and sit in the back row, like the hall monitor.
I mean, you go through law school, you go through school, and everything is supposed to be fair, but then you just start to see it creeping in. I mean, when you start to practice, you realize that there are all these things going on. If we always have male leaders, then it does become sort of the culture of just push it down, and be this way.
I don't think it's an accident that the domestic team is mostly women. Historically, women have done the bulk of sex assault trials, with some notable exceptions, of course. In the same way that women like to go to female doctors, I think there is maybe a degree of safety or trust that might be developed between a vulnerable female witness and a female Crown attorney. That helps us. Most of us are mothers, and I bring what I am as a mother to work with me, especially when dealing with some of these super vulnerable victims of human trafficking, for instance. And I've helped them fix a zipper, get something to eat. I'm never not a mother.
I wear it in my particular way because of what I do every day and who I see every day and what I talk about every day and the pictures I see and the recordings I hear and the 911 calls and the trauma in those voices. It doesn't go away. I can't forget that.
It's super hard to do trials all the time. Because the whole notion of 9 to 5 does not exist. And then when I come home, this is something that I noticed a lot, especially when my own kids were young and still needed a lot of, hands-on care when they were young. Sometimes I would come home and it's not so much that I would be physically tired, but I would be emotionally depleted. And that wasn't fair to them.
I found myself working more. I've sort of took on that sort of traditionally masculine thing where when things were rough at home, I just wanted to work more because I couldn't handle home anymore. I couldn't handle both. And so when I took as my sick leave, I said to a lot of people, it's like, well, it's because I couldn't take a sick leave from my home. I was like having difficulties with my partner and I have 2 young kids and it was just too much and I didn't want to come home. I had nowhere to go and I was seeing a counselor and she's like, you go to a stressful job and then you come home to a stressful house. And you can't do that forever.
I did take a leave of absence I wanted it to be 6 months, but it ended up being less than 4 and I had to come in I had to do a trial in the middle of it, but I did try.
I'm currently on a self-funded leave, so I'm having a little reprieve from my work.
Super common for us to take leaves of absence. Super common. It's really difficult to balance with a normal life. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a history of colleagues retiring and then dropping dead a couple months after they retire, which is pretty sad. So you have to be responsible for your own health too.
I do have an underlying mental illness, so I have an underlying depression. I've had it for a long, long time. I was always someone who was always very emotive. I was like crying, or I was like happy, sad, and I wore my emotions on my sleeve. Like kind of knew how I felt. And the more stressed and the more sort of unwell I got, the less I emoted. And that I guess is one of the symptoms of PTSD or trauma is no emotion. And that was the criticism from my partner at the time, is like, you're just not there. There's all kinds of ways that people cope that are silent and are, they're still coping in their own way. I mean, it's no secret that many lawyers are alcoholics. Like, I think there's some high rate of alcoholism, and many times during trials, that's how I coped. I'd been doing a lot of sex assault cases. I did a high-profile one involving the 2 doctors, and that lasted, it was supposed to be 4 weeks, it lasted 4 months, and that ended in an acquittal. And then I did another one. It was a really strong case, and it was a female judge, woman judge, and she just couldn't get it, and we were fighting, and I was just so fed up, and there was a hung jury. And the complainant in that case was suicidal after. I spent every weekend, every night, not only working, but worrying. And I tried to say this to my boss. I'm like, what about all the time that I spend worrying? What about the time I wake up at 4 a.m. and can't get back to sleep because I get these thoughts going through my mind? I had this, a breakdown at work. I was like, I can't do this anymore. It was like a Wednesday, and I was like, I'm just going to take the rest of the week off and go to my doctor and see what's going on. And my doctor's like, oh, I think you should take a little bit longer.
And I think that there's been some progress with awareness of vicarious trauma, and they've talked to us about it. Like, we have at conferences, we have talks about it, and it's like, yes, we recognize that you guys have that. But that doesn't stop anyone from loading it on.
I don't think it's unreasonable, and I think I'm getting to a point where I can do both. So I just finished a big murder trial, and it was okay. And I was able to come home and play with my kids a little bit more than I had in the past. but it's only because I've been able to control, and I wrote this in this Facebook post. It's like I have to work pretty hard at controlling my stress, because it can very easily just like dive in and dive down, and then I realize that you don't have any energy to come home to your kids.
It is both a weight and a privilege, because again, it is my voice. I have a voice. So I always try to remember both.
I don't think there's a Crown attorney out there who hasn't laid awake at night going over all the questions we should have asked, going over all the things we should have done differently, every single trial. I'm worried that I haven't done as much as I could, always.